You are listening to the Voice of Florida Architecture, the podcast of AIA Florida. I'm your host, Rhonda Hammond, AIA. Welcome to the next installment in our Legacy series. Every organization has a history, but AIA Florida has a legacy shaped by leaders who gave their time, insight, and energy to something larger than themselves. This series is a reflection of that legacy. Through conversations with past presidents, we revisit defining moments in the profession, explore the past that brought them to leadership, and capture the lessons they've carried forward. Their stories remind us that today's progress is rooted in yesterday's service and commitment. Today, we will celebrate the leadership of Debra Lupton, FAIA. Welcome, Debra, and thank you for being here to share your story.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun preparing.
We have a tradition on the podcast of asking our guests to share their journey to architecture. You've had one of the most unconventional careers in architecture, going through real estate, marketing, and now are CEO of a firm that specialized in MEP technology and structural engineering.
Yes.
Share your story and tell us how that journey shaped the way you see the profession today.
Well, I have always prepared to do something and never quite done exactly that, but it all comes back around in the end and plays into what I'm able to do. I had a background in architecture, went to UF at 17, straight into architecture. I was a military brat. My mom was shocked that I could possibly want to be in architecture, but I just wanted to know, how are these buildings made? Looking around the world and seeing that. So that's how I got there. And I went straight through at UF, then kind of went in and out of architecture. I had a love-hate with it because I wanted the business side to make sense. And way back in the 70s and early 80s, the profession was very much a practice, and the big firms were finally sort of becoming more business oriented. So I went into, after having my requisite years on the board, as they say, I went into marketing, which was a very, very early in the practice of using professional marketers. But my technical background really helped me out. And I was able to bridge the design side and the marketing side and the client side to communicate what we needed to communicate. Was an old marketing dog for a long time, for about 20 years, and two significantly sized firms. And because of my interest in business, then I became a CEO of a major engineering firm. And in between that, when I had a break, I got my auctioneering license, which was really fun. And I was able to use that with charitable events with SMPS, the Society of Marketing Professional Services. Everything comes into play sooner or later in some way. You just got to wait long enough.
The auctioneering license is a new one for me. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I had been in real estate and I was wanting to do some work with auctioning properties with the feds. And so I went and got my auctioneering license just because I had always thought that was very interesting. And then I found out that you had to fund all of the work up to actually selling the properties. And that was not something I was able to do at the time. So I took my auctioneering and used it for the children's home of Tampa and Orlando and raised a bunch of money for them.
Put it to good use.
Yeah.
You've described yourself as an interpreter and integrator of the profession. What does that mean, and why is it important for architects today?
I used those words in my fellowship submission, and I realized that architects are, if you're going to describe a lot of the profession, they're more introverted, they have their own language, and talking to non-professionals sometimes can be a challenge about their work. So I looked at it and said, okay, we really need to talk to the public in a way that they can understand. We need to talk to legislative officials, government officials, to talk about what needs to work for us so that the entire process works for everybody. And then finally, for me, as an architect leading an engineering firm, I was able to help interpret to the engineers why do the architects think like they do, and how do your feelings come in, and how do we meld those to make the best of the relationships and the products that we could produce from them. As an integrator, really one of the most significant things I think I did had to do with sustainability. And it was on the business side, because I had gone to AIA National in San Diego, and I remember it vividly because that was when sustainability first appeared, and I saw it and I'm like, whoa, this is going to be huge. It's just going to be huge. In the East Coast, we really hadn't seen hardly anything. So I came back to my engineering firm and I was like, okay, guys, we have to really step up and we have to champion this, because it brings us to the table in a very different way. It changes the dynamic of the architect and the engineer in the very design process. It was a process of convincing the engineers that they needed to be more than just consultants, but partners, and do it partnering very early on in the design process and all the way through to make the best energy decision. So we had a program internally at TLC, my old company, which I called the Johnny Appleseed Initiative. And I had one of my partners, Kim Shin. He actually wore a wizard hat, and he was the energy wizard, and that has a whole nother story behind it. But Kim had a year where he went around the country, paid for by us, to educate large firms, small firms, clients, anybody who would listen, about sustainability and how to technically do it and implement the process for having energy efficient and sensitive buildings. Integration came in several different ways. I was involved in the Professional Services Management Association, which is a cross-discipline C-suite group of people in the design and construction industry. And again, we were trying to figure out, how do we integrate business into design practices and engineering practices, involved with government task forces and CEO forums to really bring the aspect of our technical knowledge to the public. And lastly, as a marketer with a technical background, I was able to, through trial and error, get technical professionals to understand that marketing is not rocket science. It's how you apply your specialized knowledge and get it into reality of a building, and to convince a non-technical professional that they need your help.
It appears that's been the overarching theme of your entire career with how you've explained it there.
It has been really that aspect of communicating between different groups, different interest groups, has been a big part of my focus in my profession, because we have something we want to have happen. And how do we make that happen? Well, we have to get buy-in by different groups. And so each group has to understand what you're offering, why it benefits them, and why they want it. So it's basic 101 of get people to buy in.
You mentioned your fellowship application.
Mm-hmm.
You were elevated to the College of Fellows in 2017. AIA Fellows are recognized for their exceptional work and contributions to architecture and society. So, in your opinion, what is the significance of fellowship?
It was very significant to me because it was a validation that all of the work that I had done to progress the business of architecture made a difference. It actually made a difference. For those that aren't aware, a fellowship has different methodologies that you can receive it. You can either get it on design, or being an educator, or being someone that, it's like me, sort of a weird bird that does business in the design industry. So I had attempted fellowship several other times, but I really didn't have the right approach to look at what I did and how it impacted the business world. John Ehrig, who was another fellow and tremendous help to me, sponsored me. I remember us doing my cover letter, which is the important piece. And he came up with just the right word. And we were so thrilled. And we finished that sucker off and just ended up getting it that time. So I was excited because I was the only Florida fellow that year. And it was in Orlando. It was in my hometown, and it was in the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, the award of fellowship medals. And that's a building that my firm did all the engineering on. So it had multiple levels of meaning to me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
AIA Florida has the distinction of having 4 women consecutively elected as its president. In 1999, you blazed the trail, becoming the first woman president of AIA Florida, and at that time, its 88-year history. Now in our 114th year, including our new president-elect, we've elected 9 additional women as president of the association. What did that moment mean to you, and what resistance or opportunities came with it?
Well, it was very gratifying to be the first woman to be elected. I had been on the board since 1989 when Chuck Cole was president of AIA Florida, and he was my business partner as well. And he said, "I need a state director. You got to run." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it." And then from then on, I was hooked. I mean, I had a role in the state from that point forward to being immediate past president. I feel like I had a decade of proven leadership on the board. I knew everybody quite well. So there was not a sense of it was really breaking ground for me. It was just the next step of what I wanted to do. And my speech in 1997 for this was, wow, we need to wowize the AIA. And the idea was having fun and making it enjoyable, sort of like the Tom Sawyer effect of painting the fence, was something that we needed to ingrain in our process so that people wanted to contribute more to their profession. My process was to wowize the AIA, and I did it in a platform called Design in 99.
Design in 99.
Yeah. And the really interesting thing for me, it was quite unique because on September 11th of 1998, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it couldn't have happened at truly a worse time because I was trying to prepare for my presidency and working, and I was out. But it was magical because I decided that I would share that with everybody so they wouldn't wonder, where the heck was I? It's hard to even describe. I had people writing me, sending me flowers, people I didn't even know, telling me that I had made a difference in their life and a difference in their profession. And, just thank you so much. And I have all of those correspondences in a little box still today because it was so special to have that happen. So on January 1, I was back to work. I was back in the saddle with AIA, just kept pushing forward. But I never felt like we got particular notoriety for it. I mean, we got some extra articles and things like that. But the point was we had to have substantive progress on our issues. And that was what really mattered. And I had focused my entire AIA career on legislative issues. And so I just continued that process through my presidency.
Your advocacy and political impact really stand out as a defining strength. It could probably be said it's your superpower. Mm-hmm. With what you've shared now, can you talk about how you've approached that work?
Like any good organization, you have to have a multi-year agenda to accomplish big things. And that's one of the challenges in a volunteer organization is everybody wants to start over with their own agenda. And you can't have that big picture continuity happening. So we had, as part of our strategic plan then, was to specifically look at and maintain strong multi-year agendas. taking legislative issues is you can win one year, but it's back again. So you have to be documented and have accurate information of who the players were, what you did, what happened, so you can plan for the next step and be effective in it. So that was really key. Some of the unique things that we did, it was the first time that I actually came up with the blueprint for the legislative vision. And it was the old, architecture size sheet, hand drawn. I mean, this is taking everybody way back, all the old folks out there, but doing an actual sort of CD type piece that had some graphics to it for effect for our legislatures. Also, it came up with Friday Facts. And Friday Facts initially was Friday FAX because we did not have email at the time. Hard to believe. And then really, I think my biggest thing was always engagement in the legislative process and in the PAC, the Florida Architects Political Action Committee.
I had no idea that you were the catalyst for our tradition of the poster, the Legislative Day poster, because the legislators love it and ask for it every year. It's amazing. Right. And the Friday Facts, because we all still get it every week.
Right. Well, communication is what it's all about. And those are two, how do you set yourself apart? At the time, we faxed everybody. It was kind of a pain, but we did it. And we tried to communicate, put some of that architectural spin on our communication with the legislature, so they go, oh, these people are different. I remember them.
We may have to put the definition of a fax in the information for this podcast for those who are not sure what that is. That'll be fun. But those of us who work in the public realm have come to know and live by the DMS fee curve, the Department of Management Services fee curve. So during your tenure as president, you were instrumental collaborating with DMS leadership in updating the fee curve after 37 years, increasing the fees at that time 14 to 16%, which is massive. We still benefit from your efforts as the fees are updated every 3 years, with the increase being tied to inflation factors based on the Engineering News Records Construction Cost Index.
Right.
What did it take to make that happen?
Well, we had seen, and everyone was very frustrated by the fee curve because, it wasn't fair and, we can moan about it. But finally, after several years, I said, well, we need to do something about it. I convinced the board, I brought it up as a topic and convinced the board that we needed to broach the topic with DMS, the Department of Management Services. And Rick Logan, my partner in crime on this, was absolutely phenomenal in his commitment to this process. And we couldn't have done it without his knowledge of how to actually build that technically. But we approached DMS with this idea. Tom Lewis, architect, was the secretary of DMS, and he said, okay, we'll do it. We had a year's worth of meetings with every department that DMS worked for to do buildings. And we would go every 6 weeks to 2 months and have a discussion in Tallahassee with this group to talk about the inequities of where we were at now, and then how do we move forward to have a curve that is reflective of the current environment of costs and expenses, and something that is really fair to the design professionals, but also gives the clients good value for their money. We came up with this fee curve that had multiple curves for different degrees of complexity and size of projects. And it was Rick's genius of the whole thing. He designed it so you'd go in and you'd say, okay, you'd put in, I've got a $12 million project, and it falls in the category of being a complex building, and you'd go to the right curve and it would tell you roughly what that fee should be. And then the other big part about that was that the clients were trying to scoop all services under that curve, add services. Well, no, that's for basic services. If you want to have these other specialty capabilities, they cost money and they can be value added, but value added also costs money. So we
Mm-hmm.
listed out every single type of ad service that you could imagine and put it on the back of this sheet. So it was a single sheet, two-sided. One had the curve with instructions on how to use it, and the other said, see the back for ad services that will be additional money. So we were we were able to define it in a single flipped sheet so that everybody could get it and understand. And the really funny part about this is that that was published in July of 2006. Just the other day, my son, who is an architect, was talking about using the fee curve to validate why his fees made sense. So I'm like, this is so great because it is still helping the profession communicate about money to clients and value and what it is that you get for basic versus ad services and complexity and size of job.
That's amazing. So you've also spent decades protecting qualifications-based selection, known as CCNA or Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act. And this is an ongoing issue that we fought legislatively. Back in 2023, the Board of Governors successfully carved out the universities from having to comply with this. Why is this fight so critical to the integrity of the profession?
QBS, as we call it, qualifications based selection, is really addressing the fact that trust is an unquantifiable value in the fee, but it is priceless. And if you ever have any involvement in marketing, you will understand that clients pick firms, they select firms based on a whole plethora of different things, skill set being only the beginning benchmark to get into the game. And then it is how well do you understand the project, the challenge? How well do you understand the concerns of each of the players on the client bench? Do they trust you? They can be spending 10 or $100 million with your services. They need to have a confidence level and a trust that you get them, you get that project, and that you can move forward, because a successful project is not just the end product, but it is a process. It is a process. And if the process doesn't work, that's as detrimental as if the building doesn't work for a client. Trying to wrap all that into the fact that, architecture is not selling a widget. It is selling a process, a service, a relationship, a trust-based faith that you will have a fiduciary relationship to look out for their best interests. And that is why having a negotiated fee makes sense, because you can really delve into the details to see, for the dollar that they spend, what will this client best benefit from? And then work that out together.
You've also helped shape the qualification-based design build legislation. How did you see delivery methods changing back then?
Well, what had happened to us in this time frame is that the federal government really shifted into doing a lot of design build. And in this time frame as well, we were starting to go through some of that recession in 2008, and projects were scarce. Revenues were dropping tremendously. Trying to stay in the black was really tough. So I had gotten on the National AIA board for professional services with the federal government, and started dealing into the process that they use for design build. Because often you will see, just as AIA can sometimes set the criteria that other governments use, what the feds do can trickle down to other governmental entities. So we needed to deal with the feds and how they were doing it, and then use that as a model to talk to other governmental entities at the state and county level to say, hey, this is best practice for design build. What do? We had come up with a two-step selection process, so that instead of having 15 firms all investing this huge amount of money, it would be typically 3. On a huge job, it might be 3 to 5. So you're limiting the investment. for who's going to be involved. We wanted to make sure we had a very defined and clear scope of work. Sometimes, and even with the feds, having bridging documents, which are almost like a early set of schematic documents that show exactly what it is they want. We had to have, for very big projects, stipends for extensive design at risk work, and trying to look at reducing unknowns, limiting the cadre of competitors, and then paying for excessive design, because architects' fees aren't built on the same way that a contractor fees are. They're used to bidding, so their fees have built into it having numerous bids that don't get selected. We
Right.
do not. Unless we totally change the basis of our fees, we needed to have some consideration in the design build process so that it didn't take so many firms out of the playing field.
So you were instrumental in the architects and engineering overlap battle that led to a national AIA grant program. This was news to me.
Right.
So briefly explain this issue and what did that moment say about Florida's leadership on the national stage?
That really dealt with our local Board of Engineering trying to say that engineers could sign and seal a whole set of documents, including architecture. And it was very odd because I certainly didn't know of any engineers that wanted to do that, but it's out there. And the board was very, very aggressive in wanting to have the right to do this. So I was incensed. I mean, I was running an engineering firm and I'm like, we don't want to do this. We don't want to be an adversary to the architects. And it's a totally different scope of work and knowledge base and everything else. I started a fundraising campaign to battle the engineers at the legislative level. And we raised $106,000, which back in the day was a lot of money. We set our strategy to fight the engineers. And when we won, it was very gratifying. But then we also saw this starting to happen at different states across the country. So we proposed to AIA National that they needed to take a basket of money and allocate it to the states, because this is fought at the state level. It's not a national issue. But if enough states fall and have the pollution of the licensure and the signing and sealing of documents, then it's going to be a real problem. We were able to get them to put forth I think it was like $309,000 and allocate it out to the states and about $20,000 a pop to fight the legislative battle in their state. And that pretty much was the end of it. We were able to squash that in enough states that it was like, okay, I give up. We'll keep the licenses clean.
There you go. It'd be interesting to know if they still have any sort of allocation to help states fight certain legislative battles.
I don't know.
But
I'm sure that they do. I'm sure that they're looking at that, because A&E is really legislated on the state level. Things happen in the state, and each state has to take care of their own issues. Something national can't come in all over the U.S. and do. They've got to give it to their local constituents.
Your efforts that led into seeking AIA National to implement a grant program is probably supported the rumors that you turned FAIPAC into one of the top fundraising PACs in the country. How do you think we can get more architects comfortable engaging politically?
Well, just a little caveat there. It was one of the top architecture fundraising PACs in the country.
There you go.
We're small potatoes compared to everybody else. But still, we can make a difference. And you have a little bit of money, and if you have the right feet on the ground and message to go with it, you can make a bigger impact. I had chaired FAIPAC for 3 years and tried to look at the organization and why it wasn't working and what we needed to make FAIPAC more visible, more acceptable, and accountable. Came up with ways of, at every event, I would be hawking FAIPAC and trying to get money from everybody. coming up with creative and fun ways to try and do that. But we also, from an internal perspective, said we needed to have the right kind of information so people were familiar with the issues that we were fighting for. They could see how important it was to their personal practice, and it made that common sense connection between what they do every day and what the PAC is working toward on the legislative arena, trying to tie all this together so they could say, yes, this really affects my practice on a daily basis, Mr. Legislator. We need for you to consider that. That combination of education, of having educational pieces, doing Breakfast of Champions for FAIA, which was a wildly successful endeavor that compounded money, but also, more importantly, the message to the legislators. It elevated us in their eyes, and they would ask for Breakfast of Champions because they wanted to get together with us and have a morning to chat about what our issues were and what they were doing so they could elevate themselves in the architect's eyes.
So explain about Breakfast of Champions.
That was a program that we developed that was, again, trying to get all of this, the legislative activity and the money raising, brought to a level that architects could relate to. Why do I care? Why does it matter to me? So we came up with this plan that, local people coming together with their legislators, talking about issues that matter to them. And oh, by the way, each one of them brings a check for $250 to bundle with our PAC check. So we could deliver $1,500 to them at our breakfast while we got to meet with them for an hour. One of the, we tried to make this an exclusive thing that the top firms in the locale could attend and educate them. Had a little packet. This is the things we're going to talk about, just so they knew. They didn't feel like they would be perceived as ignorant of the issues. Now, it was a combination of getting everyone together, of bundling money, of talking issues, of preparing people. And it kind of elevated the whole idea of the political process to be less intimidating. And that was
less intimidating.
Yes.
Yes. I'd like to switch to your expertise in business leadership and industry transformation. You've spoken extensively about the necessity of being able to survive recessions and avoiding being considered a commodity. We see this trending more and more. What lessons should firms be applying today?
Well, I've always been a very business-centered practice person, and that I felt like that even in academia, the idea that architects, didn't want to deal with money. They didn't want to deal with it on a business level or even really on a project level. So as a business leader, I made it my business to figure out what I needed to do to make sure that we could weather the hard times before they hit. So we'd have reserves and healthy credit lines and use our monthly financial documents to be predictive of where the market was going. We also tracked the outlook futurists were talking about, the market economic forecasts, and tracked any legislative things that came up that could help our industry and help our businesses. For example, when they came up with the 179D tax deductions for A&E designing energy efficient buildings, that was in the recession, and we jumped on that like a hot potato. I mean, it allowed us to stay in the black because we were able to do that. So keeping our eye on those kinds of things and not just going, oh, well, that's nice, but going, okay, dig in, do it, see how you can make this work for you and affect your bottom line. The issue of commoditization has always been an interesting one for the design profession, because a commodity occurs when in the market, the consumer perceives the product to be substitutable. So that is to say that for any given project, any of you all are going to do it the same exact way. We'll have the same exact relationship. The product will be the same. A widget is a widget, but that's not what services are about. we are really in what they call an experience economy. It is something that it's not just the product that we produce that is a living, breathing thing, but also the experience of getting there, the communication of priorities, what's best, how do we solve problems, who has relationships with whom that makes the process work faster, better, and more effectively for everybody. To get out of commoditization, you have to show the difference between yourself and another firm in all of those areas, not just design, but in process itself and in relationship.
You've talked about following the money and repositioning firms. What do you think architects misunderstand the most about business?
I know this seems odd, but money is not a dirty word. It is something that should be embraced. And I think that's why I enjoyed the engineering mindset, because a lot of the stuff that they do has to do, it sort of focuses in on what's the best first cost value and then life cycle value. And you look at both of those things and you decide on what's the best solution. For me, embracing money, embracing the power of money to celebrate, to give your employees a high standard of living, to give them things and benefits that they need. And then asking what your employees want for that given pot of gold that you have that you can use to make your firm better. In the design process, has been one of my key issues with the design practice is the attitude toward money. And in designing a building, I'm like, we need to have some process where I can start and you're my client and I'll say, okay, on a scale of buying a Kia versus a Ferrari. So there's 10 cars lined up there. Which one is your budget supporting? And if you tell me it's a Toyota, then okay, we're going to design to Toyota standards. And we're not going to design to Ferrari. And then you're going to go, oh my God, we're 5 times over budget. And then we have to redesign and redesign and redesign.
And redesign.
And redesign. And so I take that same thought process and apply it to business. Which aspect is going to get more of my pot of gold versus less because of my priorities and also just how much money I have. Money affects everything, and we need to embrace that thought as a way that we communicate both internally and externally.
Debra, you need to write a book. You've had an extraordinary career. When you look back, what are you most proud of?
For me, it was interesting. I had just gotten an email that my partner, the wizard, Kim Shin, that I mentioned before, the sustainability wizard, was retiring. And I told him that of all the things we had done, I was really most proud of our progress and our leadership in sustainability, because I just felt like it was a bigger goal than us. It had bigger results than just a nice building. It literally affected the environment of the earth, one building at a time. And that our ability to help multiple professional firms understand and the how to, not just the importance of, but the how to do it, was super critical in our agenda. And to me is the thing I am absolutely most proud of.
So your family itself is a living legacy to our profession. As you mentioned earlier, your son, Alex Strong, is also an architect. He was president of AIA Orlando in 2025, himself making significant impact for the profession in that area. You must be proud.
I am. He has done an incredible job, and just a ball of energy is all I can say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you could give one piece of advice to the emerging professionals about influence, not just design, what would it be?
Well, in my mentorship of my son, the one thing I have told him, and he is following through on that, is that key to making an impact is going an inch wide and a mile deep versus a mile wide and an inch deep. Because if you spread yourself too thin, yeah, you've got all these things on your resume, but you have no accomplishments. You've got nothing you can point to say that, hey, I was a critical part of that committee, or I led that effort and it made a difference. That's where you also build the relationship in the trenches with your fellow architects that are not in your firm. So you get this incredible network of people who know you as somebody who can actually make something happen. That is the best relationship building there is. So you're not only doing good for the profession, but you're helping your industry, and you are building your credibility as a design professional that's not just focused on the business, but on the health and the progress of the industry.
So your story isn't just about leadership, it's about power, the political influence you've built, the economic impact you've created, and the narrative you've helped shape. What is the legacy you hope architects in Florida will carry forward from our generation?
I look at, and I mean, it's been 40-year ride. I look at it and say the agility to react to change, to create change, moves the industry forward. You have to have that agility to look at things, to see what's happening, and to say, so what am I going to do about it? Do I care? And if I do, what am I going to do about it? And then the next thing is relationships rule. We talk about building relationships, but that is how this business operates. You will be successful based on your relationships with clients, with other architects, with contractors, with your consultants, with really anybody that's out there. So one of the things that I always, did as a marketer is if I had information that would help somebody, but didn't necessarily mean that much to me, I would pass it on and just keep doing these kinds of things that are little investments in your relationship. And sooner or later, the world turns and it all comes back to you. Being agile to change, being focused on looking for it, and what is it that is important to me, because you can't change everything, you can't address everything, and then being cognizant of creating those relationships that will not only move your issues forward, but make your life fun while you're doing it.
That's phenomenal. We've been speaking with Debra Lupton, FAIA. Debra, thank you so much for being here and sharing your incredible story.
Well, it's been fun. I've enjoyed going through the past and looking at all the things, and I hope our future architects of today and tomorrow will embrace the industry as well as the practice.
Thank you. We hope today's conversation inspired you with the wisdom and perspective of those who have dedicated their careers to advancing architecture in Florida and across the nation. Their leadership reminds us that our collective impact is built through mentorship, service, and a shared vision for the future. Join us as we continue these conversations, celebrating the legacy that connects us and the future we're shaping together. This is Rhonda Hammond, AIA, your host. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice of Florida Architecture, a podcast of AIA Florida.